Today, I'll share the story of Hampton Court Palace, home of Henry VIII and the Tudor dynasty. आज हम आपको सैर करवाएंगे हैम्पटन कोर्ट पैलेस की. So we are at the Hampton Court Palace in near Kingston area. और आज we'll show you the palace. Built by Cardinal Thomas Wolsey in 1515, but coaxed from him by Henry VIII just before Wolsey as Chancellor fell from favour. Hampton Court Palace is England's largest and grandest Tudor structure. It was already one of Europe's most sophisticated palaces when in the 17th century Christopher Wren designed an extension. The result is a beautiful blend of Tudor and restrained Baroque architecture. You could easily spend a day exploring the palace and its 24 hectares of riverside gardens, including a 300-year-old maze. In the 1520s, the palace was given by Thomas Cardinal Wolsey to Henry VIII, who enlarged it as his favorite residence. Trees and shrubs were planted throughout its spacious grounds, and various buildings and fountains were also added. King Henry VIII reigned from 1509 to 1547. The gardens were redesigned in Dutch style for William III, who reigned between 1689 to 1702. The architect Christopher Wren added a wing for William and his wife, Queen Mary II. The palace became known for the sumptuous pageants and banquets held there for Elizabeth I and subsequent rulers. King George II, who ruled between 1727 to 1760, was the last reigning monarch to occupy Hampton Court, and in 1851, Queen Victoria conferred the palace on the British government. The staterooms are open to the public, and the palace and its gardens with Bushy Park adjoining are one of the London's major tourist attractions. King Henry VIII moved into the palace and stayed there with his 6 wives. Hi, how are you, sir?
Very well indeed, thank you.
And your name, sir?
Stephen Earl.
How long have you been here, sir?
18 years.
Wow. Anything special you want to share with us about
Yes,
the palace?
Are you going into the building?
Yes.
I'd love to share with you one lovely feature.
Yes.
That is when you go into King William's apartments.
Yes.
And you go from the great bedchamber into the little bedchamber, make sure you see the moving face of Venus. So I remind you, when you walk into the doorway, you look up and you'll see 2 figures. Mars, the god of war, is lying fast asleep across the lap of Venus. And it's her face that you look at as you walk across the room. So when you walk in, you're looking toward the top of the bed, which is a yellow poster bed covered in the drapes. And as you walk across the room, the head turns through about 90 degrees. So quite special. So you will enjoy that without a shadow of a doubt.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Thank
You're
you.
very welcome.
Later, King William III expanded the palace with magnificent Baroque architecture featuring Stuart and Georgian styles. You can explore royal rooms, art galleries, halls, and gardens that take your breath away at the Hampton Court Palace. By the 1530s, Henry VIII's Hampton Court was a palace, a hotel, a theatre, and a vast leisure complex. The king used it to demonstrate magnificence and power in every possible way through lavish banquets, extravagant court life, and fabulously expensive art. In addition to Henry's state and private apartments, where he slept, ate, and relaxed, and the Queen's private apartments, the palace contained accommodation for courtiers. The style depended on the status of the occupant, but again were intended to impress. Around Base Court, the first big courtyard of the Tudor palace inside the west front, there were 30 suites of lodgings used for the grandest visitors. The palace also held unhappy memories for Henry. His 3rd queen, Jane Seymour, died, giving the king a longed-for son, Edward. Later, Edward VI. It said Her ghost, a white wraith, appears on the anniversary of her death. Henry's fifth wife, Catherine Howard, was arrested here and later executed at the Tower for adultery and treason. It is said that Catherine's ghostly presence still screams for mercy along the corridors of the palace. Hi, you're dressed up as.
The lady in waiting.
Oh, okay.
The lady in waiting.
The noble lady. Okay. Very nice. The palace is currently in the possession of King Charles III and the Crown. In the following century, King William III's massive rebuilding and expansion work, which was intended to rival the Palace of Versailles, destroyed much of the Tudor palace. His work ceased in 1694, leaving the palace in two distinct contrasting architectural styles: domestic Tudor and Baroque. While the palace's styles are an accident of fate, a unity exists due to the use of pink bricks and a symmetrical balancing of successive low wings. King George II was the last monarch to reside in the palace. This is the Anne Boleyn's Gate. The Tudor gatehouse and astronomical clock made for Henry VIII in 1540 can be seen set into the brickwork. King Henry VIII's court consisted of over 1,000 people, while the king owned over 60 houses and palaces. The Great Hall sits at the very heart of the Tudor Palace at Hampton Court, towering over the surrounding buildings. It was designed to impress and to proclaim Henry VIII's power and magnificence. Time that Henry VIII's carpenters began working on the huge timber roof of the Great Hall in 1533, the king had divorced his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and was married to his second, Anne Boleyn. To celebrate Henry and Anne's marriage, the carpenters added Anne's coat of arms to the roof and carved the entwined letters H and A on the wooden screen at the end of the Great Hall. These poignant reminders of Anne's time as queen can still be seen today. Also featured in the roof is Anne's falcon badge and the initials AR for Anna Regina. Henry VIII chose the nostalgic hammer beam style to evoke the great halls of his medieval predecessors. Great halls were places for eating and for entertaining. On a day-to-day basis, this great hall acted as a large refectory for the lower-ranking members of the royal household and servants. Meals cooked in the nearby great kitchens were served here twice a day. Sittings for dinner started at 10 o'clock in the morning and for supper at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The work on Henry VIII's Great Hall began in 1532 as it replaced a smaller hall built between 1492 and 1514. This hall was used for daily dining and entertainment purposes. The Great Hall was restored in 1840 by Edward Jesse, who then added gorgeous stained glass windows. The colorful glass displays the genealogy of King Henry VIII, his wives, and Thomas Wolsey. The Great Watching Chamber is the first Henry VIII state apartment connected to the Great Hall. The yeomen of the guard controlled the access to this chamber, and only high-ranking visitors were permitted within. You can notice Henry VIII's royal coat of arms and his wife Jane Seymour's personal badge on the gilded ceilings. Later, William III included wooden paneling, resulting in a mixture of Stuart and Tudor furnishings. Courtiers used this chamber to eat a meal after dancing in the Great Hall during royal parties. The king's coming forth from his private apartments to the chapel on Sundays and special holy days became the principal occasion when Henry VIII made himself visible to his wider court. Today, the route is lined with portraits of Henry and his family, including his father, Henry VII, his mother, Elizabeth of York, and his children. To either side of Henry's canopy of state are Henry's two daughters, who would later become Mary I and Elizabeth I. The dynastic portrait is unusual in that it depicts an imaginary scene. Jane Seymour had in fact died shortly after giving birth to Edward, 8 years before the portrait was painted. The east end of the royal chapel once contained a great double window filled with stained glass depicting Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, and Cardinal Wolsey. This was destroyed in the Commonwealth and later bricked up. In 1718, Queen Anne commissioned architect Sir Christopher Wren to remodel the chapel. Henry VIII's kitchens at Hampton Court Palace were the largest of Tudor England. 200 cooks, sergeants, grooms, and pages worked to produce over 800 meals a day for the hungry household of Henry VIII. Feeding the court was a complex business, all done without modern conveniences, as 1.3 million logs burned in the hellish fires every year. From boiling cauldrons to roasting spits, join the day-to-day grind of Henry's cooks as you pass through this labyrinth of kitchen spaces. Between their construction in 1530 and the royal family's last visit to Hampton Court Palace in 1737, the kitchens were a central part of palace life. The Tudor kitchens were divided into a number of departments, each controlled by a sergeant and a team of yeomen and grooms. The kitchen department where meat was roasted was under the control of three master cooks, one for the king, the queen, and the rest of the court. These staff toiled under a complex set of rules, determining which of the 1200 odd members of Henry's court qualified for meals as a part of their pay. Ordering, preparing, and cooking food on this scale required an efficient system, with raw food arriving at one end and finished dishes ready to be served at the other. Henry VIII expanded and added to the kitchens at Hampton Court Palace, but they weren't for him. The king had his own private kitchen. The kitchens produced a large amount of food, and each room had a specific function. Food would be taken from larders and prepared in separate bakehouses. Meat was roasted in front of the big fires in the great kitchen. Fresh water for drinking and cooking was piped into the palace from springs 3 miles away. The clerk of the kitchens, standing at the serving place, would allocate dishes to various diners according to their rank. Raw produce was brought into the palace through a tradesman's entrance. All goods passed under an archway into a cobbled courtyard where they were all unloaded and checked scrupulously. A team of accountants, known as the clerks of the green cloth, kept meticulous records to ensure costs were kept under control. Kitchen staff carried the goods into a series of smaller kitchens or to the stores. One of the many smaller kitchens used exclusively to prepare and cook meat in the great boiling pot. The meat then went into pies or was roasted, the boiling being used to reduce the time needed on the spit. The pie cases were brought over to the boiling house from the pastry department. Meals were not just about eating, they were a display of the monarch's power. Exotic foods demonstrated wealth, while seating arrangements reflect the court's hierarchy. By Henry's reign, the price of fresh meat had fallen sufficiently so that when it was available, the average Tudor family could afford it. The century before, poor families would have rarely enjoyed meat, eating a diet of stewed vegetables and pulses. But the norm for average people was stored or preserved meat. The luxury of the court was fresh meat. Tudor courtiers enjoyed a wide variety of food, with freshly slaughtered roasted meat every day and the luxury of being able to choose from a menu of dishes. Courtiers were served a menu of dishes containing around 5,000 calories a day. In Tudor times, using exotic ingredients from distant countries was a sign of status. Henry's food was prepared in a private kitchen under the direction of the Privy Master Cook, John Bricket. King ate in his private rooms away from the crowds, but on more formal occasions, he sat alone at a high covered table in his presence chamber under the canopy of state. Higher ranking courtiers ate in the great watching chamber, lesser ranks in the great hall. For the servants, there was little choice but lots of it. Food was part of their wages for being at court. A daily menu for maids, servants, children of offices, porters, and scorers lists 2 meals of bread, beef, veal, or mutton. Table manners were very important and considered vital if entering polite society. Dutch writer Erasmus published a book in 1534 with a list of instructions, among them, sit not down until you have washed, don't shift your buttocks, sit neatly and still.